Viktor Volkov grabbed Dr. Daniel Whitmore by the collar and dragged him in front of a rolling camera, smiling for the world to see. "Tell your government," he said low and slow, "that tonight America kneels in the dirt." Behind him, the compound still smoked from a rescue mission everyone believed was already dead. 2.5 kilometers away on a freezing ridge, nobody else was watching. One woman refused to accept that. "Before we go any further, tell me where you're tuning in from tonight. Drop your city in the comments, hit subscribe, and stay with me, because this story is only getting started." Nobody in that briefing room expected Chief Petty Officer Megan Carter to be the one who mattered most. That was the first mistake. 3 hours before the operation began, 12 people sat crammed into a windowless room, lit by the cold glow of a tactical map. Lieutenant Jack Reyes stood at the front, arms crossed, jaw tight. He'd led 6 deployments. He'd lost men before. He hated losing men. "Dr. Daniel Whitmore," Reyes said, tapping a photograph pinned to the board. "Defense contractor, physicist. 3 weeks ago, he was taken from a convoy outside Kabul by a private military outfit run by a man named Viktor Volkov, former Spetsnaz. Now he sells his gun to whoever pays the most." Someone in the back muttered, "And what's he paying for this time?" "Leverage," Reyes said. "Whitmore's work touches missile guidance systems our allies aren't supposed to know about, let alone our enemies. If Volkov sells what's in that man's head, or worse, if he sells the man himself, we've got a problem that doesn't go away with an apology." Megan sat near the back, quiet, her rifle case resting against her boot like it always did. She wasn't looking at the photograph of Whitmore. She was looking at the terrain map. The compound sat inside a valley ringed by cliffs, accessible by only 2 roads and 1 goat trail that climbed nearly 2,000 meters before it flattened into a ridge. "That ridge," she said. Every head turned. Reyes raised an eyebrow. "Carter." "That's my position," she said. "That's the only angle that gives eyes on the courtyard and both entrances." A senior chief named Frank Delgado, broad-shouldered, gray at the temples, leaned back in his chair. "That climb's brutal, Carter. 6 hours in the dark, maybe more with gear. You sure you want that hike?" "I didn't ask if I wanted it," Megan said. "I said it's the only position that works." Delgado studied her for a second, then smiled, small and reluctant. "Yeah, that's what I figured you'd say." It wasn't the first time someone had tested her in a room like this. It wouldn't be the last. Megan had learned a long time ago that the test wasn't really about the mission. It was about her. 30 years old, 5 years in special operations support, more confirmed long-range hits than half the men in that room combined. And there was still, every single time, that half-second pause before people trusted her word over her uniform. She'd stopped being angry about it years ago, mostly. "Carter takes the ridge," Reyes said, closing the debate. "Coleman spots for her. The rest of us go in on foot breach at 0200 extract Whitmore, and we are wheels up before Volkov's people know what hit them." Petty Officer Danny Ortiz, 26 years old and never quite able to keep his mouth shut, raised a hand. "And if it's not that easy," Reyes didn't answer right away. Nobody in that room wanted to say it out loud, but everybody was thinking the same thing. Volkov didn't build compounds like this one by accident. 3 defensive rings, motion sensors on the outer perimeter, a private army numbering somewhere between 40 and 60 men, most of them former military themselves. "If it's not that easy," Reyes finally said, "then that's why Carter's on the ridge." Megan felt every eye in the room shift toward her again. She didn't flinch. She'd carried worse weight than a room full of stairs. An hour later, Megan sat alone in the equipment bay, running her fingers over the barrel of her rifle the way another person might run their hands over a photograph of someone they loved. Ray Coleman. Her spotter dropped into the seat across from her, already halfway through a protein bar he didn't seem to be enjoying. "You good?" he asked. "I'm always good before a mission," Megan said. "It's the after that gets complicated." Coleman huffed a laugh. He was 51 years old, the oldest operator on the team by a decade, built like a man who'd survived more mistakes than most people ever made. He'd spotted for 6 different snipers over the years. He always said Megan was the only one who never made him nervous. "You remember Kandahar?" he asked. "Which time? The bridge." Megan smiled faintly. "I remember you told me the wind was fine and it wasn't fine. It was fine when I called it. It was fine for about 4 seconds, Ray." 4 seconds was enough. She looked down at her hands. Steady. They were always steady. That was the thing people never understood about her job. It wasn't about being fearless. It was about being so disciplined that fear simply had nowhere left to live inside you. You think this Volkov guy is as bad as they say? Coleman asked. I think men who threaten to broadcast an execution usually mean it, Megan said quietly. Coleman stopped chewing. That's not in the brief. It's in the intel packet, buried in a footnote. Volkov's people posted a warning 2 days ago on an encrypted channel. Said if anyone attempted a rescue, the world would watch what happens next. Command know you read that. Command wrote it. Coleman exhaled slowly and looked at her for a long moment. Then I guess it's a good thing you're the one on that ridge. She didn't answer that. She just closed the rifle case, latched it, and stood. 6-hour climb, she said. We should get moving. The insertion happened just after midnight, a blacked-out helicopter skimming low over terrain that looked from 300 feet up like the surface of another planet. Nobody spoke much. Ortiz cracked one joke about the in-flight snacks that nobody laughed at. Delgado checked his rifle for the 4th time, not because it needed checking, but because his hands needed something to do. Megan sat with her forehead nearly touching the cold metal of the fuselage, running the shot in her mind before she'd ever taken it. Distance, elevation change, wind drift, bullet drop. She ran the numbers the way other people recited prayers. When the helicopter finally set down in a dry riverbed 4 kilometers from the compound, the team moved out in near total silence, boots crunching softly on frozen gravel. Megan and Coleman split off from the main element almost immediately, beginning the climb that would take them nearly to sunrise. Somewhere around the 3rd hour, Coleman's breathing turned ragged. You need a break, Megan had asked, not slowing her own pace. I need you to admit you're not human, Coleman muttered. I'm human, I'm just stubborn. Same thing in your case. They kept climbing. By the time the sky began turning that pale gray color that comes right before dawn, they'd reached the ridge, and Megan understood immediately why Command had approved her position. From up there, the entire compound spread out beneath them like a diagram someone had drawn just for her. Courtyard in the center, 2 guard towers, a row of low buildings along the northern wall, and near the back, a smaller structure with reinforced doors that the intel packet had flagged as the probable holding location for Whitmore. She settled into position, slow, deliberate, every movement designed to leave no trace. Coleman sat up beside her, rangefinder already in hand. 2,540 meters to the courtyard center, he said quietly. Wind's inconsistent, coming off the eastern ridge in gusts. Copy. You feeling that climb yet? I feel everything, Ray. I'm just not going to let it show. Below, through her scope, Megan watched the compound slowly wake up. Guards rotating, a truck pulling through the main gate, smoke rising from a cooking fire near the northern wall. It looked for a moment disturbingly ordinary, like any other outpost on any other morning. Then her radio crackled. Ghost 1, this is Anvil. In position, awaiting your eyes. Megan keyed her mic softly. Anvil Ghost 1 has visual. Compound looks quiet. No unusual movement at the target structure. Copy that, Ghost 1. We're moving in 3 minutes. Coleman glanced at her. You believe that quiet? Megan didn't answer right away. She kept scanning, slow and methodical, sweeping the courtyard, the towers, the tree line beyond the northern wall. Too quiet, she finally said. You want to flag it? She hesitated. Every operator knew the cost of a false alarm. Command didn't like being told to abort a mission based on a feeling. They wanted numbers confirmed, threats, hard data. She had none of that, just an instinct that had kept her alive through 11 deployments. Ghost 1 to Anvil, she said. Recommend caution on approach. Something feels off. There was a pause on the radio. Copy Ghost 1, proceeding with caution. It wasn't enough. She knew it wasn't enough at the second she said it, but it was all she had, and the clock on Whitmore's life wasn't going to wait for her instincts to become certainties. Down below, the SEAL element began moving through the pre-dawn shadows toward the outer wall. Reyes led from the front, Ortiz and Delgado flanking 3 more operators trailing behind in tight formation. They moved the way men move when their lives depend on silence, each step placed with surgical precision. Breach point in 60 seconds, Reyes whispered into his mic. Copy, Megan answered. Courtyard's clear. No movement at the towers. That should have been reassuring. It wasn't, because towers with no movement usually meant one of 2 things. Either the guards had abandoned their posts, or somebody had already told them not to bother watching. The team reached the outer wall without incident, cutting through a section of fencing that Intel had flagged as the weakest point in the perimeter. Reyes signaled the breach, and one by one the operators slipped through into the compound proper. Still nothing. No alarms, no gunfire, no shouting. This doesn't feel right, Delgado muttered, his voice barely audible, even over the tactical channel. Copy that, Reyes said. Stay sharp. Carter, talk to me. Megan swept her scope across the courtyard again, and this time she caught something. A flicker of movement near the smaller structure at the back. A door cracked open just slightly, where a moment ago it had been closed. Movement at the target building, she said. Doors opening. I don't have a visual on who. Copy. Proceeding toward target. The team crossed the courtyard in a low crouch. Weapons up, eyes scanning every window, every shadow. They reached the smaller structure, and Reyes signaled a breach. The door swung open. Empty. Not just empty of resistance, empty entirely. No hostage, no guards. Just a single chair sitting in the center of the room, and on that chair a folded piece of paper. Ghost One, this is Anvil, Reyes said, his voice suddenly tight. Target location is a bust. Repeat, target is not here. Megan's stomach dropped. Copy, Anvil. Recommend you. The compound lit up like the sun had exploded inside it. Every light in every building blazed on at once, floodlights mounted on the guard towers swinging around and locking onto the courtyard. And from a speaker system Megan hadn't even known existed, a voice boomed out across the entire valley, deep accented, almost amused. Welcome, the voice said. I have been expecting you. Every operator inside that compound froze for exactly 1/2 of 1 second. That half second was all Volkov needed. Gunfire erupted from every direction at once, muzzle flashes lighting up windows that had looked empty just moments before, rounds tearing into the courtyard, where the SEAL team stood suddenly exposed under the blazing floodlights. Contact, contact! We are taking fire from all sides, Reyes shouted over the radio, his voice cutting through static and chaos. Through her scope, Megan watched the ambush unfold in horrifying detail. Men who had been invisible seconds earlier now poured out of hidden positions along the rooftops, the towers even beneath false floor panels in the courtyard itself. It wasn't a defended compound. It was a kill box, and they'd walk straight into it. Ghost One, I need eyes on shooters now, Reyes yelled. Megan's training took over before conscious thought even had a chance to catch up. She swept her scope across the rooftops, identifying threats, calling positions. Shooter northeast, rooftop green shirt, has a clear line on your position. She fired. The shooter dropped. Second shooter tower, 2 elevated position. She fired again. Another confirmed down. You're clear on the north side, Anvil, but you've got at least 6 more on the ground level closing from the west. Below, Delgado took a round to the shoulder and staggered, but didn't go down, returning fire with one arm while Ortiz dragged him toward cover behind an overturned supply crate. Delgado's hit, Ortiz shouted. He's hit. He's still moving. I get him. Get him stable, Reyes yelled back, laying down suppressive fire toward the western wall. Megan's rifle cracked again and again, each shot precisely placed, each one buying her team another half second of survival. But even from her position on the ridge, she could see the math wasn't in their favor. Volkov's men kept coming wave after wave, and the compound Megan had once called a trap now felt like something worse. A slaughterhouse. Ghost One, this is Anvil, actual. Reyes's voice cracked with strain. We are pinned down, we have 1 wounded, and we are critically low on cover. I need extraction options now. Back at command, hundreds of miles away, in a secured operations center, a colonel named Hayes stood over a live feed of the operation, watching red icons multiply across a digital map faster than his analysts could update it. Get me casualty numbers, Hayes barked. 1 wounded confirmed, sir. Possibly more. Teams pinned in the courtyard. Enemy strength is significantly higher than our intel projected. Hayes's jaw tightened. He'd authorized this mission personally. He told the families of these men that this operation had solid intelligence behind it. Someone gave Volkov a warning, he said quietly. Sir, he knew we were coming. He built a trap and waited for us to walk into it. That doesn't happen by accident. Nobody in the room answered him because nobody had an answer. On the radio, Reyes's voice cut back and ragged, now breathless. Command, this is Anvil, actual. We cannot hold this position. I need authorization to abort. Hayes closed his eyes for 1 brief second. Every command decision in his career had led to this exact moment, the one where the mission and the men became 2 separate things, and he had to choose which one mattered more. Anvil Actual, this is Command, he said, his voice steady despite everything happening inside him. Abort the mission. Repeat, abort the mission. Pull back to extraction point immediately. On the ridge, Megan heard those words through her earpiece, and something inside her chest went cold. Copy, Command. Reyes answered, already pulling Delgado toward the breach point they'd entered through. Ghost One, cover our withdrawal. Copy, Anvil. Megan said, her voice flat, controlled even as her mind screamed at the unfairness of what she was hearing. Covering now. She fired again and again, clearing a path through the chaos as her team fought their way back toward the perimeter, dragging their wounded, leaving behind a mission that had collapsed in less than 4 minutes. Come on, Coleman muttered beside her, watching through his own optics as the team scrambled for the breach point. They're gonna make it! They're gonna make it! Megan didn't answer. She kept firing, kept clearing threats, kept doing the only thing she knew how to do in a moment like this. The SEAL team reached the outer wall, slipped through the same gap they'd used to enter, and began falling back toward the extraction point in the riverbed below. Behind them, gunfire slowly tapered as Volkov's men, apparently satisfied with having proven their point, stopped pursuing. They'd let them go. That realization hit Megan harder than the ambush itself. Volkov hadn't been trying to kill the entire team. He'd been trying to send a message. Ghost One, this is Anvil Actual, Reyes said, breathing hard, his voice thick with adrenaline and fury. We are clear of the compound. Delgado Stable Ortiz has him. We are proceeding to extraction. Copy, Anvil, Megan said. Good copy. Carter, Reyes's voice softened slightly. Good shooting up there. You bought us the time we needed. Just doing my job, sir. You did more than your job. The radio fell silent for a moment, and Megan lowered her rifle slightly, her hands finally beginning to shake now that the immediate danger had passed. Beside her, Coleman let out a long breath he seemed to have been holding for the last 4 minutes. That was close, he said. That was too close. Megan didn't respond. She'd already brought her scope back up, sweeping the compound below. Still scanning, even though the order had been given, even though the mission was technically over. That was when she saw it. 2 guards emerging from the smaller structure at the back of the compound, dragging a third man between them, his hands bound, his clothing torn, his face bruised but unmistakably alive. Dr. Daniel Whitmore. He'd been there the entire time, hidden, waiting, bait in a trap disguised as a rescue. Ray, Megan said quietly, I've got a visual on the hostage. Coleman's head snapped up, his own optics finding the same scene. He's alive. He's alive, Megan confirmed. The guards dragged Whitmore into the center of the courtyard, forcing him to his knees beneath the same floodlights that had illuminated the ambush minutes earlier. Behind him, 2 more men began setting up a tripod, mounting something on top of it that Megan recognized immediately, even from 2,500 meters away. A camera. Ghost One, this is Anvil Actual. Reyes's voice came through, strained, already moving away from the compound. What's your status? Are you disengaging? Megan's finger hovered near her radio, but for a moment she didn't answer, because standing in that courtyard, illuminated like a stage under those floodlights, was a man who was about to die in front of a camera broadcast to the entire world as proof that America's best had already failed him. And the only person who could stop it was sitting alone on a ridge 2,500 meters away, with a rifle in her hands and an order in her ear that told her the mission was already over. Ghost One, Reyes said again, more urgent this time. Carter, talk to me. Are you disengaging? Megan stared through her scope at Dr. Daniel Whitmore kneeling in the dirt and at Victor Volkov's men preparing to make an example of him in front of the entire world. She thought about every doubt anyone had ever had about her, every quiet dismissal, every moment someone had wondered if she belonged in a room full of operators twice her size. None of that mattered anymore. What mattered was the man in that courtyard and the fact that she was the only person on Earth who might still be able to save him. Ghost One. Coleman said quietly beside her, his voice tight with something between fear and understanding. What are you thinking? Megan didn't look away from her scope. I'm thinking, she said slowly, that the mission isn't over. The words left Megan's mouth and hung there in the cold mountain air like something that couldn't be taken back. Coleman stared at her. Megan, say that again. You heard me. Command already gave the order. Reyes already confirmed. We are supposed to be packing up and getting off this ridge right now. I know what the order was, Ray. Then what are you doing? Megan didn't answer immediately. Through her scope, Whitmore's face came into sharper focus, the swelling around his left eye, the way his shoulders shook even though the morning wasn't that cold. A man who had spent 3 weeks believing every single day might be his last, and now understanding in real time that today probably was. Ghost 1, this is Anvil Actual. Reyes's voice came through again, tighter now, edged with something between confusion and dread. Repeat your last transmission. Are you disengaging from your position or not? Megan keyed her mic. Anvil, I have visual confirmation on the hostage. He's alive. They've got him in the courtyard with camera equipment being set up around him. A pause, a long one. Copy that, Reyes said slowly. That's not good, Ghost 1. No, Megan agreed. It's not. Down in the riverbed 4 kilometers from where Megan sat, the SEAL team had reached a shallow depression that offered just enough cover to regroup. Delgado sat propped against a boulder, his shoulder wrapped tight with a field dressing, already soaked through with blood, his face pale under the gray pre-dawn light. Ortiz knelt beside him, checking the wound with hands that weren't quite steady. How's he doing? Rectas asked, crouching low, rifle still pointed back toward the compound. Round went through soft tissue, missed the joint, Ortiz said. He's lucky. Bleeding's controlled for now, but he needs a hospital in the next few hours, not the next few days. I'm fine, Delgado muttered, his voice thin. Don't talk about me like I'm not here. You got shot, old man, Ortiz said. I'll talk about you however I want. Delgado managed something close to a laugh, which turned into a wince halfway through. Reyes stood keying his radio. Command, this is Anvil Actual. We have 1 wounded stable for transport, requesting confirmation on extraction, bird ETA. The response crackled back almost immediately. Anvil Actual, extraction bird is 14 minutes out. Proceed to landing zone as briefed. 14 minutes. Reyes looked back in the direction of the compound, though he couldn't see it from here, not with the terrain folding in on itself the way it did. Somewhere behind those ridgelines, a man they'd flown 8,000 miles to save was still in enemy hands, and every second that passed felt like a door slowly closing. Command, this is Anvil Actual, he said again. Be advised, our sniper element has visual confirmation. The hostage is alive, and enemy forces are preparing what appears to be a media broadcast. Recommend we consider options before that bird arrives. There was a pause on the other end, a longer one than Reyes liked. Back at the operations center, Colonel Hayes stood over the same live feed watching a satellite thermal image that showed heat signatures moving in a tight cluster around the compound's central courtyard. Beside him, a younger officer named Major Patricia Kellerman leaned in, studying the same data. Sir, if they are setting up broadcast equipment, Kellerman said, that changes the calculus significantly. I'm aware of what it changes, Major. Sir, with respect, if Volkov executes that scientist on camera, the political fallout alone. I don't need you to tell me about political fallout. Hayes snapped, then caught himself exhaling hard. I'm sorry, that wasn't fair. Kellerman didn't flinch. It's fine, sir, but we need a decision. 14 minutes until extraction. If we're sending that team back in, it needs to happen now while there's still a window. Hayes stared at the screen. Every red icon on that map represented a life. Every decision he made in the next 60 seconds would follow him for the rest of his career, one way or another. Get me the sniper's channel, he finally said. A technician typed rapidly, and a moment later, Hayes' voice came through directly on Megan's earpiece, cutting past Reyes, past the usual chain straight to her. Ghost 1, this is Command Actual. Colonel Hayes speaking. I need your assessment. Give me everything you're seeing right now. Megan didn't hesitate. Command hostage is confirmed alive, kneeling center courtyard, hands bound. 2 guards flanking him directly. Camera equipment being assembled roughly 15 meters from his position. I count 6 additional hostiles visible in the immediate area, likely more inside structures. Do you have a shot on the primary threat? Megan's jaw tightened. Negative confirmation on primary threat identity. I don't have Volkov in my sight line yet. Understood. Ghost 1, listen to me carefully. I am not authorizing engagement at this time. Distance and conditions exceed acceptable risk parameters for a hostage rescue scenario. One miscalculation, and you kill the man we came to save. Copy that, sir. Megan's voice stayed level professional, even as something inside her chest twisted tight. Understood. Maintain observation. Report any change in status immediately. Extraction bird is inbound for the ground team. Once they're clear, we will reassess. Copy command. The channel clicked off. Coleman glanced sideways at her. You good? I'm good. You don't sound good. I said I'm good, Ray. Coleman let it drop, but he kept watching her out of the corner of his eye. The way you watch a kettle you know is about to start screaming. Down in the courtyard, the guards forced Whitmore into a slightly different position, angling him so the rising sun would catch his face on camera. One of them, a broad man with a scar running down the side of his neck, crouched in front of him and said something too quiet for the microphones to have caught, even if there had been microphones listening. Whitmore lifted his head. His voice when it came was hoarse but steady. You know this won't work, he said. Killing me doesn't erase what I know. It doesn't erase the fact that people are already looking for the buyers who paid Volkov to grab me. You're not ending anything. You're starting something. The guard backhanded him across the face. Whitmore's head snapped sideways, blood immediately welling at the corner of his mouth. But when he lifted his eyes again, there was no fear in them. Only exhaustion, and beneath the exhaustion, something like defiance that refused to fully die. Through her scope, Megan watched the strike happen in real time, and her finger twitched against the trigger guard before she consciously stopped it. Easy, Coleman murmured without looking at her. Easy, Megan. I saw that, Ray. I know you did. They're hurting him for the camera. They want it to look real. It is real, Coleman said quietly. That's what makes this so damn hard. The extraction helicopter arrived 12 minutes later, kicking up a storm of dust and gravel as it settled into the riverbed. Reyes and Ortiz loaded Delgado aboard, first the older man gritting his teeth against the pain, but refusing to cry out, refusing to give anyone the satisfaction. Anvil Actual, all personnel aboard, Reyes reported, requesting instructions. There was a pause, and then Hayes' voice came through heavier now than it had been minutes earlier. Anvil Actual, return to base. Your part of this operation is complete. Reyes' hand tightened on the doorframe of the helicopter. Sir, with respect, we're leaving a hostage on the ground. I'm aware of that, Lieutenant. Then what's the plan? Because right now it feels like there isn't one. The plan, Hayes said, and something in his voice made even the pilot glance back, is that your sniper element remains on overwatch and we are evaluating every option available to us. That's all I can tell you right now. Reyes closed his eyes for one long second. Then he climbed aboard the door, sliding shut behind him, and the helicopter lifted off into a sky the color of old bruises, carrying his team away from a man they hadn't been able to save. On the ridge, Megan heard the whole exchange over the tactical channel, and something about hearing Reyes fight for Whitmore, even after the order had already been given, made the weight in her chest heavier instead of lighter. They're gone, Coleman said quietly, watching the helicopter shrink into the distance. It's just us now. It's just us, Megan repeated. Down below, the guards finished positioning the camera. A third man, thinner than the others, wearing a jacket that looked expensive, compared to the rest, walked into frame and began speaking directly into the lens. His voice picked up faintly by the compound's outdoor speaker system, echoing off the surrounding rock. People of the world, the man said, his accent thick, his tone almost theatrical. Today you will witness what happens to those who believe they can enter my territory and take what belongs to me. That's not Volkov, Coleman said, adjusting his optics. Different build. Volkov's supposed to be bigger. Megan swept her scope slowly across the courtyard, searching. Then where is he? The answer came a moment later, and it came from an unexpected direction. A side door on one of the northern buildings opened, and a man stepped out, tall, thickly built, moving with the unhurried confidence of someone who had never once doubted his own safety. He crossed the courtyard at a slow walk, his eyes on Whitmore the entire time, and when he finally stopped in front of the camera, the thinner man immediately stepped aside, deferring to him without hesitation. There he is, Coleman said. That's Volkov. Megan's crosshairs settled on him. 2,540 meters. A moving target partially obscured by two guards flanking him at all times, standing in front of a hostage whose survival depended entirely on precision Megan hadn't yet been given permission to use. Volkov leaned toward the camera, his voice carrying easily now, confident, almost bored. Your government sent soldiers to take back what I already own, he said. They failed. They ran like frightened children back into the mountains. And now the world will see the price of that failure. He turned toward Whitmore. Say goodbye to your country, doctor. Megan's finger found the trigger guard again, resting there, not pulling, just resting the way it always did before a shot she hadn't yet been cleared to take. Ghost One, this is Command. Hayes's voice returned suddenly urgent. We are seeing the broadcast staging on satellite. Confirm status. Command Volkov is on scene standing beside the hostage. 2 guards providing cover. I have a partial line but not a clean shot. Requesting authorization to engage if opportunity presents. The pause this time felt longer than any of the others combined. Negative, Ghost One. I cannot authorize a shot at this distance with a partial line. If you miss or if the round deflects off a guard's position, you kill the hostage yourself. Do you understand what I'm telling you? Megan's jaw tightened so hard it ached. I understand, sir. Maintain position. We are exploring every alternative. The channel clicked off again, and in the silence that followed, Coleman looked over at her, his expression grim. They're not going to authorize it, he said quietly. Not at this range, not with this much risk. I know. So what happens if Volkov gives that order before Command changes their mind? Megan didn't answer. She didn't have an answer. All she had was a scope full of a man about to die and an earpiece full of silence. Below in the courtyard, one of the guards produced a length of black cloth and moved toward Whitmore, clearly intending to place it over his head. Whitmore, for the first time since the ordeal began, actually pulled back some instinctive animal part of him, refusing to accept the blindfold, even though refusing changed nothing about what was coming. No, he said, his voice cracking. No, you don't need that. Just say what you're going to say and get it over with. I don't need to be blind for it. Volkov studied him for a moment, something almost like respect flickering across his face, and then he waved the guard off. Let him watch, Volkov said. Let him see it coming. That is more honest. The guard stepped back, folding the cloth away. Through her scope, Megan watched Whitmore's chest rise and fall in short, ragged breaths, watched him fight to keep his composure in front of a camera that was about to broadcast his final moments to the entire world. Ray, she said quietly, I need you talking me through wind, continuously. I don't care what Command says. If a window opens, I am not going to miss it because I hesitated to ask. Coleman looked at her for a long beat. You're going to take this shot without authorization, he said. It wasn't a question. I'm going to be ready to take this shot, Megan said. There's a difference. Is there? There has to be, Ray, because if I wait for permission and that permission never comes, a man dies in the next few minutes, and I spend the rest of my life knowing I had the shot and didn't take it. Coleman exhaled slowly, then adjusted his rangefinder without another word, which was, Megan understood its own kind of answer. Wind shifting, he said, coming stronger off the eastern face now. Call it 8 to 10 miles an hour, gusting higher. Copy? That's going to push your round wide if you don't compensate hard. I know how to compensate, Ray. I know you do. I'm just saying it out loud so we're both thinking about it. Down in the courtyard, Volkov straightened, turning back toward the camera, his hand resting almost casually on the sidearm at his hip. In 1 hour, he announced, the doctor will die. I give your government 1 hour to consider what it means to challenge me. Perhaps they will find something more valuable to offer than a failed rescue. The broadcast cut the red light on the camera blinking off, and for a moment the entire courtyard seemed to exhale collectively, guards lowering weapons slightly, the tension bleeding out of the air like water through cracked stone. An hour, Coleman said, disbelief coloring his voice. He's giving them an hour. He's not doing it out of mercy, Megan said grimly. He's doing it because he wants the world watching when it happens. He wants maximum audience. That's not compassion. That's theater. Whitmore, still kneeling, still bound, let his head drop forward, his shoulders shaking silently in a way that made it clear he understood exactly what that hour actually meant. Not a reprieve, a countdown. Back at the operations center, the mood had shifted from urgent to something closer to desperate. Hayes stood with his arms crossed, staring at the frozen frame of Volkov's broadcast still playing on one of the monitors, while Kellerman worked a secondary screen, scrolling through intelligence updates that scrolled faster than anyone could fully process. Sir, she said suddenly, you need to see this. Hayes crossed to her station. What is it? I pulled the compound's defensive layout against our original mission brief. She pointed at overlapping schematics on her screen. Sir, the positions Volkov's men occupied during the ambush, the timing of the floodlights, the placement of shooters, None of that matches what our satellite reconnaissance showed us 48 hours ago. Meaning what exactly? Meaning somebody updated Volkov's defensive posture specifically to counter our assault plan. Not generally specifically. He knew our breach point, he knew our formation, he knew almost exactly how many operators we were sending in. Hayes felt something cold settle in his stomach. You're telling me there's a leak. I'm telling you it's the only explanation that fits the pattern, Kellerman said quietly. Sir, somebody with access to this operations planning gave Volkov what he needed to turn our rescue into a trap. The room went very quiet. Who had access to the full plan? Hayes asked, his voice low. Command staff, the operations team here, and obviously the assault team itself. You're not suggesting one of the operators on the ground. I'm not suggesting anything yet, sir. I'm telling you what the data shows. Somebody talked, or somebody's communications were compromised. Either way, this mission was blown before it ever started, and we need to find out how before we send anyone back in. Hayes closed his eyes for a moment, absorbing the weight of what she was telling him. An entire team had walked into an ambush that had been custom built to kill them, and somewhere right now, whoever was responsible was still out there, possibly still watching, possibly still feeding information to a man who was currently counting down the final hour of a hostage's life. Keep that between us for now, Hayes said. I don't want that information hitting the general channel until we know more. The last thing that team needs right now is to start doubting each other on top of everything else. Understood, sir. On the ridge, unaware of the conversation happening hundreds of miles away, Megan kept her scope trained on the courtyard, watching Volkov's men mill about with the casual confidence of men who believed they'd already won. Whitmore remained on his knees, occasionally shifting his weight, clearly in pain, clearly exhausted, but alive. For now. 51 minutes, Coleman said quietly, checking his watch. I heard you the first time, Ray. I'm just keeping track. I know you are. A guard broke away from the main group near the camera and began walking the perimeter rifle slung casually across his chest, moving in a slow loop that would eventually bring him toward the base of the ridge Megan and Coleman occupied. We've got company, Coleman murmured, going perfectly still. Megan tracked the guard through her scope, her breathing slowing automatically. Every muscle in her body settling into the discipline that years of training had carved into her. He's on a standard patrol loop. He's not looking for us specifically. Doesn't mean he won't find us anyway. He won't. You sound very confident for someone lying on exposed rock 2.5 kilometers from 60 armed men. I'm confident because we're not exposed, Ray. We're camouflaged, we're motionless, and he's not trained to look up. Ground troops almost never look up. Almost never isn't never. The guard continued his slow walk, occasionally glancing toward the base of the cliffs, occasionally stopping to adjust his rifle strap, moving with the bored inattention of a man who had walked this same loop 100 times before and expected today to be no different from any other day. He stopped almost directly below their position. Megan's heart rate, already carefully controlled, dropped even further, her body responding to danger not with panic but with an almost supernatural stillness. The guard lifted his head, scanning the ridgeline above him. For one endless second, Megan was certain he was looking directly at her. Then he lowered his gaze, adjusted himself, and continued walking, disappearing back toward the compound's main gate without ever breaking stride. Coleman let out a breath he'd clearly been holding. Okay, that happened. Told you he wouldn't find us. You also told me the wind was fine in Kandahar. That was one time, Ray. Despite everything, despite the man dying by inches in a courtyard below them, despite the countdown ticking away towards something neither of them wanted to witness. Something like a tired smile flickered across Megan's face before disappearing just as quickly. 40 minutes remained. Back at command, Hayes stood in front of a secure line, speaking directly to someone several ranks above his own, someone whose name never appeared on any official document Megan would ever see. Sir, I need authorization to consider unconventional options, Hayes said. Standard protocols got us an ambush and a wounded operator. We are running out of time and running out of good choices. The voice on the other end was calm, measured, entirely unbothered by the urgency in Hayes' tone. Colonel, I understand the pressure you're under, but authorizing a sniper engagement at this range against this target with a hostage in the blast radius of any potential miss, that's not a decision I can approve lightly. Sir, with respect, if we do nothing, the hostage dies anyway. And if your shooter misses, the hostage dies by our own hand instead of the enemy's, and this entire operation becomes a story about American forces killing the very man they were sent to save. Do you understand the difference in how that gets remembered, Colonel? Hayes gripped the edge of the console in front of him. I understand it, sir. I just don't think it should be the deciding factor when a man's life is on the clock. I never said it was the only factor. I said it was a factor. Give me options that don't involve a low probability shot at maximum range, and I will consider them immediately. Hayes closed his eyes. There weren't any other options. Everyone in that room knew it. The nearest reinforcements were hours away. Air support required clearance that would take longer than the hour Volkov had given them. Diplomatic channels moved at the speed of bureaucracy, not the speed of a countdown clock. There was only a woman on a ridge with a rifle and a decision that wasn't hers to make, except that in about 35 minutes, it might become exactly that. On the ridge, Megan checked her own watch, then returned her eye to the scope, watching Volkov emerge from one of the buildings. Again, this time accompanied by 2 additional guards, all 3 moving toward the courtyard with the unmistakable purpose of men preparing for something final. Ray, she said quietly, I think he's moving up the timeline. Coleman checked his own watch. It's been 38 minutes. He said an hour. I know what he said. Look at him. That's not a man walking to check on a hostage. That's a man walking toward an execution. Coleman raised his own optics, studying the scene below. His expression darkened. You might be right. Megan keyed her radio. Command, this is Ghost 1. Be advised, target Volkov is moving back toward the hostage location with additional personnel. This may not wait for the full hour. Hayes' voice came back immediately, tension evident even through the compressed audio. Copy, Ghost 1. Stand by. Command, I need a decision. If he's moving early, we may not have the luxury of waiting for perfect conditions. Ghost 1, I am working on it. Stand by. Megan's finger tightened almost imperceptibly against the trigger guard. Down below, Volkov stopped directly in front of Whitmore, crouching slightly to bring himself level with the kneeling man's face. Whatever he said next wasn't picked up by any microphone, wasn't broadcast anywhere, existed only between the two of them in that single suspended moment. Whitmore's expression changed. Something in his eyes shifted from exhausted defiance into something closer to genuine terror, the mask he'd been holding together finally beginning to crack. Something's wrong, Megan said. Ray, something just changed down there. What do you mean? I mean, look at his face. Volkov just told him something, and whatever it was, it broke him a little. Volkov straightened, turning back toward the camera operator, and gestured sharply. The red recording light blinked back on. Ghost 1, this is Command. Hayes' voice tighter than before. Be advised, we are seeing renewed broadcast activity. Confirm status. Command, they're going live again. Early. He's not waiting for the hour. Silence on the other end, just long enough to feel like an eternity. Ghost 1, stand by for authorization. Copy, Command, but respectfully, sir, I am running out of standby. Volkov turned toward the camera, his expression harder now. Any trace of theatrical patience gone entirely. It appears, he said, his voice carrying across the compound, across the mountains, across whatever channels were now carrying this broadcast to whoever was watching on the other end, that your government does not value this man's life as much as I hoped. So we will not wait the full hour after all. He drew his sidearm. Ray, Megan said, her voice suddenly very calm, very quiet, the calm that came right before everything else fell away. Range current wind, give it to me now. 2,538 meters, wind steady at 9 miles an hour, gusting to 12 coming from the east. Megan's eye settled behind the scope, her breathing slowing into the rhythm she'd trained her entire body to find under exactly this kind of pressure. Ghost 1, this is Command. Hayes' voice suddenly sharp, suddenly urgent. Do not engage without authorization. I need you to hold position. Megan didn't answer. Her finger found the trigger resting against it now, instead of merely near it, every calculation she'd ever made in her career compressing into the next several seconds. Volkov raised the weapon, aiming it not at Whitmore's chest, not at his head, but pausing there, drawing the moment out for the camera, for the audience, for the world he wanted watching when he finally pulled the trigger. Ghost 1, Hayes' voice cracked through her earpiece one final time. I need an answer. Are you holding position or not? Megan's breath went still. The wind shifted just slightly, just enough for her to feel it against her cheek, and somewhere beneath her ribs, 30 years of doubt, 30 years of proving herself, 30 years of exactly this kind of impossible moment. All of it went quiet at once, replaced by something that felt less like a decision and more like a certainty that had been waiting her entire life to arrive. She didn't answer command. She didn't answer Coleman. She simply exhaled slow and even, and let her fingers settle against the trigger with the stillness that felt for the first time all morning like the only true thing left in the world. The shot broke the silence of the mountain like the world itself had cracked open. 2,538 meters away, Viktor Volkov's head snapped sideways mid-sentence, the sidearm falling from his hand before he even understood what had happened. He was on the ground before the sound of the rifle ever reached the compound, because sound even at that speed could never quite catch up to what a bullet had already done. For a full second, nobody moved. Not the guards, not the camera operator whose finger was still frozen on the recording button, not Whitmore kneeling in the dirt with his eyes squeezed shut, waiting for a bullet that was never going to come from the direction he expected. Confirmed hit. Coleman breathed, his voice barely above a whisper, like saying it any louder might undo it. Megan, confirmed hit, he's down. Megan didn't lower her rifle. Her eyes stayed pressed to the scope, her breathing still locked into the same disciplined rhythm, because a fallen target wasn't the same thing as a finished mission, and she had learned that lesson a long time ago. Usually in rooms full of people who thought the hard part was pulling the trigger. The hard part was everything that came after. "Command, this is Ghost One," she said, her voice flat, controlled, betraying nothing of what had just happened in her chest. "Primary target is down. Repeat, primary target is down." There was no immediate answer, just dead air, the kind of silence that meant an entire operations center on the other side of the world had gone completely still. "Command, do you copy?" Megan said again. Hayes's voice finally broke through, and it didn't sound like a colonel's voice anymore. It sounded like a man who just watched something happen that he hadn't authorized and couldn't quite process. "Ghost One, say that again." "Volkov is down, sir. I took the shot." Another pause, longer this time. "You were ordered to hold position." "Yes, sir." "You disobeyed a direct order." "Yes, sir." The silence that followed felt heavier than the gunshot itself. Down in the courtyard, the guards finally snapped out of their frozen shock, and chaos detonated in every direction at once. Men scrambled for cover, shouting in two different languages, some diving toward the fallen body of their commander, others sprinting for weapons they'd left leaning against walls just moments earlier. "They don't know where the shot came from," Coleman said, watching through his own optics. "Look at them. They're panicking." "They will figure it out," Megan said. "Fast. We need to think about what happens next." "What happens next is they're going to kill Whitmore out of pure spite the second they realize their boss is dead." Megan's stomach dropped. Coleman was right and both of them knew it. Through her scope, she watched two guards near the camera equipment turn toward Whitmore. One of them raising his rifle, his face twisted with the kind of fury that came from watching a leader die in front of you with no warning and no explanation. Megan didn't wait for authorization this time. She fired again. The guard dropped before his finger ever reached the trigger. "Ghost One," Hayes's voice cracked through the radio, sharp with something between fury and disbelief. "What is happening down there? Report." "Second hostile engaged, sir. He was preparing to execute the hostage in retaliation. You are engaging targets without authorization. Carter, do you understand the position you are putting this operation in?" "Sir, with respect." Megan said, her voice steady even as her heart hammered against her ribs. "The hostage is still alive because of it." Kellerman leaned toward Hayes, her voice low but urgent. "Sir, whatever we think about the how, she's right about the outcome. The alternative was watching Whitmore die on a live broadcast." Hayes closed his eyes for one brief second, the weight of the entire operation pressing down on him in a way that made him feel every one of his 49 years at once. "Ghost One," he finally said, "hold your position and continue reporting. We will deal with protocol later. Right now I need eyes on that compound." "Copy, command." Down below, the compound had descended into full chaos. Guards ran in every direction, some taking up defensive positions along the outer wall, others clustering near the fallen bodies of Volkov, and the second guard shouting orders that nobody seemed to be following with any real coordination. Without a clear chain of command, the disciplined ambush from hours earlier had collapsed into something closer to a stampede. Whitmore, still kneeling, still bound, stared at the two bodies near him with an expression that mixed relief and horror in equal measure. Ray Megan said, "Someone needs to get to Whitmore before this gets worse. If those men regroup, they're going to use him as a bargaining chip or kill him outright." "We're 2.5 kilometers away, Megan. We can't exactly walk down there and pull him out ourselves." "I know that. So what are you thinking?" Megan's mind raced through the geometry of the problem, the same way it raced through wind calculations and bullet drop, treating the chaos below as just another equation that needed solving. The extraction bird already dropped the team. How far out is it now? Coleman checked the tactical display strapped to his forearm. Command channel says it's roughly 11 minutes from the forward base refueling. That's too long. I know it's too long, Megan. I don't have a faster answer. On the radio, Rhea's voice suddenly broke through tight with adrenaline. "Ghost One, this is Anvil Actual. We heard the shot. What's your status?" "What happened?" Megan keyed her mic. "Volkov is down. I took the shot without authorization. Second hostile engaged when he tried to retaliate against the hostage. Compound is in chaos, but Whitmore is still exposed and still bound." There was a beat of stunned silence, and then Reyes's voice came back quieter, almost disbelieving. "You took the shot." "I took the shot." "Carter, that's—" He stopped himself, and when he spoke again, his tone had shifted into something harder, more focused, the sound of a man switching immediately from shock into action. "Command, this is Anvil Actual. Request immediate authorization to return to target location. Our sniper has created an opportunity, and I am not going to let it go to waste." Back at the operations center, Hayes stared at the live feed, watching red icons scatter across the digital map of the compound as Volkov's remaining forces lost cohesion in real time. Sir Kellerman said quietly, "This might be the only window we get." Hayes exhaled hard. "Anvil Actual, this is Command. Authorization granted. Return to target location, extract the hostage, and get out. You have a limited window before that compound reorganizes itself." "Copy, Command. Moving now." The helicopter that had carried them away only minutes earlier banked hard, reversing course, racing back toward the compound with Reyes Ortiz and 3 other operators aboard weapons, checked adrenaline burning through exhaustion like fuel through a dry engine. On the ridge, Megan kept her scope trained on Whitmore, watching him twist against his restraints, watching him glance nervously between the 2 bodies near him, and the guards still scrambling to reorganize themselves along the compound's perimeter. "Ray," she said, "I need you counting hostiles. All of them. I want to know exactly what Reyes is flying back into." Coleman swept his optics across the compound, calling out positions with practiced precision. 4 hostiles regrouping near the north wall, 3 more moving toward the main gate. I count 2 on the eastern tower, though one looks like he's arguing with the other instead of watching for threats. "Copy. What about near Whitmore?" One guard hesitating. He looks like he doesn't know what to do without someone telling him. "That won't last." As if to prove her right, a new figure emerged from one of the buildings, older, heavier, moving with the kind of authority that suggested he'd just appointed himself the new man in charge. He crossed to the guard standing near Whitmore, spoke sharply, and pointed toward the hostage. "That's not good," Coleman muttered. The guard raised his rifle, pointing it directly at Whitmore's head. Megan's finger tightened against the trigger without conscious thought, and Coleman, sensing the shift in her breathing, spoke fast. "Wind steady 9 miles an hour, same as before. You've got the shot if you need it." "Command," Megan said, her voice sharp, now urgent. "New hostile threatening the hostage directly, requesting authorization to engage." Hayes didn't hesitate this time. "Authorization granted, Ghost One. Take the shot if you have it." Megan already had it. The rifle cracked again, and the new guard folded sideways, dead before his own order could ever be carried out. The remaining guard near Whitmore flinched violently, staring at his fallen comrade, then bolted for cover without a second thought, abandoning his post entirely. "Third confirmed," Coleman said quietly. "Megan, that's 3 kills in under 4 minutes." "I'm aware, Ray. I'm just saying that's not something people walk away from unchanged." Megan didn't answer. She kept her eye on the scope, kept scanning for the next threat, because there was no room right now for anything except the next several seconds and the several seconds after that. The helicopter carrying Reyes's team crested the ridgeline above the compound and immediately began taking scattered small arms fire from the disorganized remnants of Volkov's forces. "Taking fire," the pilot shouted. "Landing zone is hot." Get us down anyway, Reyes yelled back. We don't have time to find somewhere safer. The helicopter dropped hard into the same riverbed they had extracted from less than 20 minutes earlier, and the team spilled out immediately, moving in a tight defensive formation toward the compound's outer wall. Ghost One, we are moving in, Reyes called over the radio. Talk to us. Two, copy Anvil. You've got scattered resistance, mostly disorganized. 4 hostiles near the north wall, 3 near the main gate, 2 on the eastern tower. Nobody's coordinating. This isn't the ambush from before. This is a group of men who just lost their leader and don't know what to do next. Copy that. Ortiz Simmons, take point on the eastern approach. We're going straight for Whitmore. The team breached into the outer wall for the second time that morning, moving with a speed and urgency that hadn't been possible during their first approach, when caution had still felt like the safer option. Now caution was a luxury nobody could afford. Gunfire erupted almost immediately, but this time it came in scattered bursts, rather than the coordinated crossfire before, easy enough for trained operators to counter-target by target position by position. Contact left! Ortiz shouted, dropping to one knee and firing toward a guard emerging from behind a supply crate. The guard went down before he could return fire. Contact right! Another voice called, and a second exchange of gunfire echoed across the courtyard, brief and decisive. Megan tracked the entire engagement through her scope, calling out threats the moment she spotted them, her voice steady even as her pulse hammered beneath her ribs. Hostile on the tower, adjusting his angle toward your position, Anvil. The response came in the form of a single shot from Reyes himself, and the guard on the tower crumpled without ever firing back. Clear, Reyes called, moving to Whitmore's position. They reached the center of the courtyard within 90 seconds, and Ortiz dropped to Whitmore's side, immediately cutting through his restraints with a combat knife, while Reyes covered the surrounding area. You're okay, Ortiz said, half to Whitmore, half to himself. You're okay, we've got you, just stay down. Whitmore's hands, freed from the rope that had bound them for 3 weeks, trembled violently as he tried to push himself upright. They said they were going to kill me on camera, for everyone to see. They didn't, Ortiz said. That's what matters right now. Who fired those shots? I heard them, but I didn't understand what was happening. Volkov just fell. Ortiz glanced upward toward the ridge, an almost reverent expression crossing his face. You've got a guardian angel up there, Doc. Ask me about her later. Right now, we need to move. They pulled Whitmore to his feet, and the team began falling back toward the extraction point, still exchanging occasional gunfire with the last scattered pockets of resistance, but nothing that came close to the coordinated slaughter of their first attempt. Ghost One, this is Anvil Actual, Reyes called, breathing hard as they moved. We have the hostage. Repeat, we have Dr. Whitmore, and he is alive. On the ridge, Megan finally allowed herself to exhale a long, shaking breath that seemed to release something she'd been holding since the moment she first saw Whitmore dragged into that courtyard. They got him, Coleman said, his voice thick with something between relief and disbelief. Megan, they actually got him. Megan didn't answer right away. She kept her scope trained on the retreating team, providing cover as they crossed the final stretch toward the extraction point, her discipline refusing to relax even now, even with the mission's outcome finally within reach. Ghost One, this is Command. Hayes' voice returned quieter now, more measured. Confirm hostage status. Confirmed Command. Anvil has recovered the hostage. He appears to be ambulatory and conscious. Copy that, Ghost One. A pause. Good work. The words felt strange, coming from a man who less than 10 minutes earlier had been furious enough to call her actions a direct violation of orders. Megan didn't respond to the compliment. She simply kept watching, kept covering, until the team reached the extraction point and the helicopter lifted off once more, this time carrying Whitmore alive, wounded, but breathing, heading home. Only then did Megan finally lower her rifle. Her hands, she noticed distantly, were shaking. You okay? Coleman asked quietly. I don't know yet, Megan admitted. Ask me again in a few hours. They began the long process of breaking down their position, packing gear, with the same methodical care they'd used to set it up, even though every part of Megan's body wanted nothing more than to collapse against the cold rock and simply breathe for a while. 4 kills, Coleman said quietly, almost to himself, as he coiled a length of cable. In one morning. That's more than most operators see in an entire career. I wasn't counting Ray. I know you weren't. I was. She looked at him. Does that bother you? Coleman considered the question seriously the way he considered most things. No, he finally said. It doesn't bother me. What bothers me is that command is going to make you answer for disobeying that order, and I don't think they're going to care that you were right. Megan's jaw tightened. She hadn't let herself think about that yet, hadn't let herself consider what came after the adrenaline faded and the report started getting written. I'll deal with that when it comes. You always say that, because it's always true. They began the long climb back down the mountain in silence, the sun now fully risen, casting long shadows across terrain that had just hours earlier nearly swallowed an entire mission whole. Megan's legs ached with a bone-deep exhaustion that had nothing to do with the physical climb and everything to do with the weight of what she'd just done. Back at the forward operating base, the helicopter carrying Whitmore and the assault team touched down amid a flurry of medical personnel and hurried debriefings. Delgado was rushed immediately into surgery for his shoulder wound, while Whitmore was wrapped in a thermal blanket and led toward a waiting medical tent, still shaking, still processing 3 weeks of captivity that had nearly ended in front of a camera. Reyes found a quiet corner near the medical tent and finally allowed himself to sit down, his body trembling now that the immediate danger had passed, the delayed reaction of a man who had spent the last several hours running on pure adrenaline. Ortiz dropped down beside him, offering a canteen of water that Reyes accepted gratefully. That was insane, Ortiz said. That entire thing, insane. Yeah, Reyes agreed, taking a long drink. It was. Carter took out 3 hostiles from 2.5 kilometers away. Command didn't even authorize the first shot. I know. You think she's going to get in trouble for that? Reyes stared out toward the mountains, toward the ridge where Megan and Coleman were still making their long descent, invisible now against the vast landscape, but no less present for it. I think, he said slowly, that Command is going to have a very complicated conversation with her when this is all over. But we got the hostage back because of her. I know that too, Danny. Doesn't mean it's simple. Back at the operations center, Hayes stood staring at the same live feed, now showing nothing but empty compound Volkov's remaining forces scattering into the surrounding hills, rather than face whatever American reinforcements they assumed were coming next. The mission, against every likelihood the morning had presented, had ended in success. But success built on a violated order was still, in the eyes of military protocol, a problem that needed addressing. Sir, Kellerman said quietly, standing beside him. For what it's worth, I don't think there's an alternate version of this morning where Whitmore survives without Carter making that call. I know that, Major. Then what's the issue? Hayes turned to look at her, and for a moment, the weight of 30 years of military service seemed to settle across his shoulders all at once. The issue, he said, is that today it worked. And because it worked, everyone is going to want to remember it as a triumph, a hero story, a woman who trusted her instincts when everyone else hesitated. Nobody's going to want to think about the 1,000 other scenarios where that same decision gets someone killed instead. And if we don't address that, if we don't hold the line on protocol, even when protocol gets us the wrong outcome, then we're telling every operator in this military that orders are optional whenever they personally believe they know better. Kellerman was quiet for a long moment. That's a hard line to hold, sir, especially today. It's supposed to be hard, Hayes said. That's what makes it matter. Hours later, back at the base, Megan finally set down her rifle case in the barracks assigned to her unit, her body aching in ways she hadn't fully registered during the mission itself. She sat on the edge of a cot, staring at her hands, still faintly trembling, despite everything. The door opened and Reyes stepped inside, his own exhaustion evident in the lines of his face, though something in his eyes carried a warmth that hadn't been there during the earlier chaos. Carter, he said. Sir. Whitmore's stable. He's already talked to his family. Delgado's out of surgery, should make a full recovery. Megan nodded slowly. That's good. Reyes crossed the room and sat down on the cot across from her, close enough that the conversation felt private, even in a barracks that technically belonged to the whole unit. You saved his life today, he said. You know that, right? I know I did what I thought was right. It was more than right, Carter. It was the difference between a body bag and a man going home to his family. Megan looked up at him. Command's going to review the decision, aren't they? Reyes hesitated, then nodded. Yeah, they are. I disobeyed a direct order, Lieutenant. Twice if you count the second engagement before authorization technically came through. I know. So they're going to have to do something about that. Otherwise, what's the point of having orders at all? Reyes studied her for a long moment, something like respect and concern mixing together in his expression. You already know what's coming, don't you? You already made peace with it. Megan was quiet for a moment, staring down at her still trembling hands. I made peace with it before I ever pulled the trigger, she said finally. I knew what taking that shot could cost me. I took it anyway. That doesn't mean I'm not scared of what happens next. It just means I already decided it was worth it. Reyes exhaled slowly, nodding though the weight in his chest didn't seem to lift much. For what it's worth, he said, I'll say what I saw in that review. Every word of it. Thank you, sir. Don't thank me yet, Reyes said, standing, his expression turning grim. You haven't sat in that room yet. Trust me, it's not going to feel like gratitude. He left her alone in the quiet barracks, the adrenaline of the morning finally fading into something heavier, something that settled deep in her bones and refused to loosen its grip. Outside, word had already begun spreading through the base, whispered between an operators who hadn't been on the mission but had heard the story secondhand, already shifting and growing with each retelling. A sniper who'd taken an impossible shot, a hostage saved in the final seconds, an order disobeyed in the name of a life that would have otherwise been lost. Nobody yet knew how the story would end, because somewhere above the wounded, above the rescued, above the celebration, quietly building among exhausted soldiers who'd survived a mission gone catastrophically wrong before turning into something miraculous, a formal review was already being scheduled, one that would determine whether Megan Carter would be remembered as the woman who saved Dr. Daniel Whitmore's life, or the operator who taught an entire military exactly why orders existed in the first place. The review board convened 4 days later in a room that felt nothing like the briefing room where this entire mission had begun. No tactical maps here, no terrain photographs, just a long table, 3 senior officers seated behind it, and a single chair positioned across from them, where Megan now sat back straight, hands folded, waiting. Colonel Hayes sat at the center of the panel, flanked by 2 officers Megan had never met, a Navy JAG lawyer named Commander Ruiz on his left, and a stern-faced admiral named Patricia Voss on his right, whose reputation for procedural rigidity preceded her into every room she entered. Chief Petty Officer Carter, Voss began, her voice clipped, professional, betraying nothing. You understand why you're here? Yes, ma'am. Then let's not waste time. On the morning of the operation, you received a direct order from Colonel Hayes to hold your position and refrain from engaging the target designated Volkov. Is that correct? Yes, ma'am. And you disobeyed that order? Yes, ma'am. Voss made a small note on the paper in front of her, her expression unreadable. You then disobeyed a second order, or rather engaged a secondary target before formal authorization was transmitted through proper channels. Is that also correct? Megan's jaw tightened slightly, but her voice remained level. The timeline was compressed, ma'am. I called out the threat and requested authorization simultaneously. Authorization came through before I fired. That's not what the transmission logs show, Chief. With respect, ma'am, the transmission logs show a 3-second gap between my request and Colonel Hayes' authorization. My shot was fired 1 second after his authorization came through. Voss glanced down at a printed transcript in front of her, studying it for a long moment. 1 second, she repeated. Yes, ma'am. That's a very precise number for something happening in the middle of a firefight. I've spent my career learning to be precise under pressure, ma'am. It's the only part of any of this I could actually control. Something flickered across Voss's face, gone before Megan could name it. Hayes beside her remained silent, his own expression carefully neutral, though Megan could feel the weight of everything unsaid sitting behind his eyes. Commander Ruiz leaned forward. Chief Carter, I want to walk through your decision-making process on that ridge. Not the outcome, the process. Can you describe what was going through your mind in the moments before you fired the first shot? Megan was quiet for a moment, choosing her words carefully. I was watching a man about to be executed on camera, ma'am. I had already been told to hold position because the shot exceeded acceptable risk parameters. I understood that reasoning. I still understand it. But I also understood that if I didn't take the shot, there was a 100% chance Dr. Whitmore would die in the next several seconds. And if I did take it, there was a chance, however small command believed it to be, that he might live. You weighed a policy against a life, Ruiz said. I weighed a probability against a certainty, Megan corrected quietly. The policy existed to prevent me from taking uncertain shots that might endanger a hostage. But at that specific moment, there was no uncertain scenario left where doing nothing kept him alive. The only variable was whether my shot succeeded or failed. Waiting wasn't caution anymore. It was just watching. The room went silent for a moment. Hayes finally spoke, his voice quieter than it had been in the courtyard 4 days earlier. Chief Carter, when I gave that order, I want you to understand something. I wasn't wrong to give it. Based on the information I had, based on standard risk assessment, for a shot at that range, hesitation was the correct call by every metric this military uses to evaluate these situations. I understand that, sir. Do you? Because the way this story is already spreading through the base, through unofficial channels, people are calling you a hero who saw what the brass couldn't see. That's a dangerous narrative, Chief. It's dangerous because it's not entirely wrong, and it's dangerous because it's not entirely right either. Megan met his gaze steadily. I never asked to be called a hero, sir. I took a shot because a man was dying in front of me, and I believed I had the skill to stop it. That's all it was. I wasn't thinking about narratives. I believe you, Hayes said. But this board isn't just evaluating what you did. It's evaluating what happens to every future operator who hears this story and decides their own judgment should override a direct order without possessing your specific skill set, without your specific years of training, without the specific certainty you had in that moment. That's the precedent we're wrestling with here, Chief. Not just you. Megan absorbed that for a long moment. It wasn't the first time she'd considered it. She'd spent 4 sleepless nights considering exactly that question, turning it over in her mind on the long flight home, in the quiet hours of the barracks. In every moment she wasn't actively distracted by paperwork or physical therapy for the ache in her shoulder from the extended prone position. Sir, she said finally, I don't have a good answer for that. I know what I did could be dangerous if someone with less experience, less certainty, or worse judgment used my decision as a justification for their own reckless call. I know that. But I also know that if you ask me to go back to that ridge, back to that exact moment, and make the choice again, knowing everything I know now, including this review, including whatever consequence comes out of that door, I would take the same shot. Every time. I can't apologize for that, sir, because I don't believe it was wrong. I can only accept whatever this board decides is the appropriate response to it. Voss studied her for a long, silent moment, her pen tapping once against the table. That's either the most honest answer I've heard in one of these reviews, she said slowly, or the most reckless one. I genuinely can't decide which. Maybe it's both, ma'am, Megan said quietly. A faint, almost imperceptible softening crossed Voss's expression. Maybe it is. The board excused Megan from the room while they deliberated, and she found herself sitting alone in a narrow hallway outside the fluorescent lights, humming overhead, her hands folded tightly in her lap. She'd faced enemy fire without her pulse rising the way it was rising now. Coleman found her there 20 minutes later, having talked his way past a junior officer who tried to tell him the hallway was restricted during proceedings. How'd it go? He asked, sitting down beside her. I don't know yet. They're still deciding. You tell them the truth. I told them exactly what happened. Coleman nodded slowly. Good, that's all you can do. They sat in silence for a while, the hallway quiet except for the occasional muffled voice drifting out from behind the closed door, where Megan's fate was currently being weighed by 3 people who hadn't been on that ridge, who hadn't watched Whitmore's face through a scope, who hadn't felt the exact texture of that impossible decision. You scared? Coleman finally asked. Megan considered the question honestly. A little. Not about what they decide. More about what it means if the answer is that I was wrong. You weren't wrong, Megan. I know I got the outcome I wanted. That doesn't automatically mean the decision itself was right. Those aren't the same thing, Ray. A wrong decision can still get lucky. I need to actually believe the difference matters, or I'm no better than someone who gambles and calls it skill. Coleman studied her for a moment, something like admiration mixing with concern in his weathered features. You've thought about this a lot. I've had 4 days and nothing else to do but think about it. The door opened and a young lieutenant stepped out, informing Megan the board was ready for her. She stood smooth the front of her uniform and walked back inside with the same steady composure she carried onto every mission, even though nothing about this room felt like a mission she knew how to win. Voss spoke first, her voice formal, measured the voice of someone reading a decision rather than offering an opinion. Chief Petty Officer Carter, this board has reviewed the full transcript of communications satellite footage and testimony from all involved personnel regarding the events of this operation. We find that you did in fact disobey a direct order from your commanding officer during an active combat engagement. Megan's stomach tightened, but her face remained still. However, Voss continued, this board also recognizes that your actions directly resulted in the survival of a hostage who would otherwise, by every reasonable assessment available at the time, have been executed. Your marksmanship, discipline, and battlefield judgment under extreme duress are not in question. What is in question is the precedent set by rewarding or even simply excusing a violation of direct orders regardless of the outcome it produced. She paused, glancing briefly at the papers in front of her before continuing. This board's decision is as follows. Chief Petty Officer Carter will receive a formal reprimand for insubordination during an active combat operation to be entered permanently into her service record. This reprimand reflects the necessity of maintaining command authority and operational discipline regardless of individual outcomes. Megan absorbed the words without visible reaction, though something in her chest tightened at the phrase permanently into her service record. However, Voss continued, and something in her tone shifted slightly. This board also wishes to formally acknowledge in a separate commendation that will accompany the reprimand that Chief Carter's actions demonstrated exceptional skill, composure, and moral courage under circumstances that exceeded reasonable training parameters. It is the position of this board that the reprimand exists to preserve institutional discipline, not to diminish the very real heroism displayed in the field that day. Hayes spoke next, his voice quieter, more personal than it had been throughout the entire proceeding. Chief Carter, I want to say something outside the formal record if the board will permit it. Voss nodded slightly. Hayes looked directly at Megan. I gave that order because it was the correct order to give based on everything I knew in that moment. I stand by that. But I also want you to understand that watching you disobey it and watching you save that man's life because of it taught me something about the limits of what protocol can account for. There will never be a rulebook detailed enough to cover every possible second of chaos on a battlefield. Sometimes the only thing standing between disaster and survival is a person who has trained their entire life to make an impossible call in an impossible moment. You made that call. I don't ever want to encourage every operator under my command to believe they can override my orders whenever they feel confident enough. But I also don't ever want to forget what you did on that ridge. And I don't want this reprimand to become the only thing people remember about it. Megan felt something tighten in her throat, unexpected, unwelcome in a room like this. Thank you, sir. Don't thank me, Hayes said. You earned every part of this, both the good and the difficult. That's the whole point. The proceedings ended shortly after, and Megan walked out of that room carrying two very different pieces of paper, a formal reprimand that would follow her career for the rest of her service, and a commendation that acknowledged what that reprimand couldn't fully capture. Outside, Coleman was waiting again, reading her expression before she'd said a single word. Well, he asked. Reprimand, Megan said, and a commendation. Coleman's eyebrows rose. Both. That's unusual. That's the military trying to hold two contradictory truths at the same time, Megan said, managing a tired half smile. Apparently they decided I deserved that much complexity. Coleman huffed a small laugh, relief evident in the way his shoulders finally relaxed. You want to get something to eat? I think we both earned a meal that doesn't come out of a ration pack. Yeah, Megan said. I think we have. Word of the review's outcome spread through the base quickly, though the details remained mostly confined to those who'd been directly involved. What spread faster and with far more emotional weight was the news that Dr. Daniel Whitmore had been discharged from medical care and was preparing to fly home to his family in Virginia. 2 days later, Megan found herself standing in a quiet corner of the base's departure terminal, having been informed somewhat to her surprise that Whitmore had specifically requested to see her before his flight. He looked different than he had in the courtyard, cleaned up, rested, though something in his eyes still carried the shadow of 3 weeks that had nearly ended his life on camera. He crossed the terminal toward her with a slight limp, extending his hand. Chief Carter, he said, I wasn't sure they'd let me thank you properly. Megan shook his hand, feeling oddly uncertain about how to hold herself in a moment like this, so different from every other type of encounter her job usually produced. I'm glad you're going home, Dr. Whitmore. Because of you, he said simply. I know what happened. Lieutenant Reyes told me everything. The order to hold, the distance, what you risked by ignoring it. I just did my job. No, Whitmore said, shaking his head, his voice firm despite its exhaustion. Please don't minimize it like that. I was kneeling in that courtyard, Chief Carter. I watched Volkov raise that weapon. I had already made peace with the fact that I was going to die in front of a camera, that my family would have to watch that footage someday, that it would be the last image of me they'd ever have. And then he just fell. I didn't understand what happened until your team pulled me up and told me later. You didn't just save my life. You saved my family from having to live with how I died. Megan felt something tighten in her chest, harder to control than anything the review board had produced. I'm glad I could do that for you. I read that you got in trouble for it, Whitmore said quietly. For disobeying orders. I did. That doesn't seem fair. Megan considered how to explain it, the same complicated truth she'd been wrestling with since the moment the review board delivered its decision. It is fair in its own way, she said finally. The military can't function if everyone decides their own judgment, overrides the chain of command whenever they feel certain enough. I broke a rule that exists for good reasons, even though I believe breaking it was the right choice in that specific moment. Both of those things can be true at once. Whitmore studied her for a long moment. You're a more complicated person than the story people are telling about you. Megan managed a small, tired smile. Most people are if you actually stop to ask them instead of just repeating what they heard secondhand. Whitmore's flight was called over the terminal speakers, and he extended his hand once more, holding Megan's grip a moment longer than necessary. Whatever happens next in your career, Chief Carter, I hope you know that somewhere out there a man is going home to his wife and his daughter because you were willing to carry a decision that most people would have been too afraid to make. That matters more than any reprimand ever could. He left, disappearing through the departure gate, and Megan stood alone in the terminal for a long moment, feeling the strange weight of gratitude settle over exhaustion that hadn't fully faded since the mission itself. In the weeks that followed, life on base slowly returned to something resembling normal, though Megan noticed subtle shifts in how people treated her. Junior operators who'd never spoken to her directly now nodded respectfully in hallways. Senior enlisted personnel who'd once questioned whether she belonged in rooms full of male operators now deferred to her judgment in briefings without hesitation. It wasn't the recognition she'd wanted, not exactly because she'd never wanted recognition in the first place, but it was she came to realize something quieter and perhaps more meaningful, a shift in how people saw her competence, not as something that needed to be proven anymore, but as something simply understood. Delgado, recovering steadily from his shoulder wound, found her one afternoon in the equipment bay, cleaning her rifle with the same careful attention she gave to everything related to her craft. Heard you got chewed out and congratulated in the same meeting, he said, easing himself into a chair across from her, still favoring his injured shoulder slightly. Something like that, Megan said, not looking up from her work. Only the military, Delgado said, shaking his head with something between amusement and disbelief. Only the military could manage to do both those things to the same person on the same day. I think it's honestly the most accurate response they could have given, Megan said. Neither answer alone would have told the truth. Delgado studied her for a moment. You ever regret it, even a little? Megan set down the cleaning rod, finally meeting his gaze directly. No, she said. I don't regret the decision. I regret that it had to be a decision at all. I regret that Volkov built a trap detailed enough to nearly kill this entire team. I regret that somebody somewhere gave him information he shouldn't have had. But the choice I made on that ridge, I'd make it again. Delgado's expression sharpened slightly. Wait, information he shouldn't have had? Megan hesitated, realizing she'd said more than she'd intended to. You didn't hear that from official channels? No, Delgado said slowly. I didn't hear that from anywhere. Megan glanced toward the door, lowering her voice slightly. I overheard something during the review process, a conversation between command staff that wasn't meant for me. Something about the compound's defenses matching our assault plan too precisely to be coincidence. Delgado's face went carefully neutral, the expression of a man processing information he clearly hadn't expected. You're saying someone leaked our mission plan to Volkov. I'm saying that's what the conversation suggested. Megan said carefully. I don't know anything official. I don't know who. I just know it's out there somewhere in the background of everything that happened, and nobody's talking about it openly. Delgado was quiet for a long moment, his jaw working slightly. That's not something you just let go, Carter. I know. If someone on this base or someone with access to that mission sold us out, that's not a one-time thing. That's a pattern waiting to repeat itself. Megan met his eyes, and for the first time since the mission had ended, something colder than exhaustion settled into her chest. A recognition that whatever had happened in that courtyard might not have been the end of the story after all, but merely the first visible thread of something far larger still hidden beneath the surface. I know that too, she said quietly, and I don't think Command is planning on telling either of us anything more than they already have. Delgado leaned back slowly, his expression darkening. Then maybe, he said, it's time somebody started asking the right questions. Delgado's words settled over the equipment bay like a weight neither of them wanted to carry alone, but once spoken there was no way to set it back down. I don't have proof, Megan said quietly, glancing again toward the door. I have a fragment of a conversation I wasn't supposed to hear. Fragments are how every real investigation starts, Delgado said. Nobody hands you the whole truth wrapped up with a bow. You pull one thread and you keep pulling until something comes loose. And if Command finds out we're pulling on it without authorization, I already have one reprimand in my file, Frank. I don't need a second one for insubordination that isn't even mine to investigate. Delgado leaned forward, his voice dropping lower. Megan, if someone leaked our assault plan to Volkov, that means somewhere in this chain there is a person willing to trade in American lives for money or leverage or fear. And they're still out there, still breathing the same air as the next team that gets sent somewhere just like that compound. You want to sit on that because you're worried about your file. Megan didn't answer right away. She set the cleaning rod down fully this time, meeting his eyes. No, she finally said. I don't. 2 days later, Megan requested a meeting with Major Kellerman, the only officer she'd overheard during the review process who'd seemed genuinely troubled by what the intelligence data suggested. She found Kellerman in a small office cluttered with satellite printouts and half-empty coffee cups, the kind of workspace that belonged to someone who rarely left it before midnight. Chief Carter, Kellerman looked up surprised. I wasn't expecting you. I need to ask you something, ma'am, and I need you to understand I'm not asking as part of any official channel. I'm asking because I was on that ridge and I think I deserve to know if someone put my team in that position on purpose. Kellerman's expression shifted, guarded, now careful. Chief, I don't know what you think you heard. I heard enough, Megan said, cutting her off gently but firmly. I heard that the compound's defenses matched our assault plan too precisely to be coincidence. I heard the word leak. I'm not asking you to violate protocol, ma'am. I'm asking you as one person who was almost killed by that leak to another person who's actually looking into it, whether I should be worried that it happens again. Kellerman studied her for a long moment, then rose and quietly closed the office door. Sit down, Chief, she said. Megan sat. What I'm about to tell you, Kellerman said, lowering her voice, does not leave this room. Not because I'm protecting anyone. Because if this gets out before we're certain, we could tip off exactly the person we're trying to find. Understood. Kellerman pulled a folder from beneath a stack of papers, sliding it across the desk. 2 days after your mission, we cross-referenced every communication touching the operational plan against a list of financial transactions flagged by a separate agency completely unrelated to this base tracking, suspicious payments linked to private military contractors operating in the region. One name showed up in both places. Megan opened the folder. Inside was a photograph of a man in his 40s, clean cut, wearing a uniform she recognized immediately. That's Master Sergeant Aaron Bell, she said slowly. He works logistics coordination. He wasn't even part of the assault team. No, Kellerman said, but he had access to the operational planning software used to coordinate assault timing breach points and personnel numbers for every mission run out of this base in the last 8 months, including yours. You think he sold it? I think the financial records show 3 deposits into an account linked to him, routed through 2 shell companies totaling almost $200,000 in the 6 weeks before your mission. I think that's not a coincidence. But I don't have him confessing to anything, and I don't have direct evidence connecting those deposits to Volkov specifically. Right now, it's circumstantial. Megan felt something cold settle into her stomach. So what happens now? Now, Kellerman said, we build the case carefully enough that it holds up without alerting him that we're looking, because if he suspects we're closing in, people like that don't sit still and wait to be arrested. They disappear. Or worse, they make sure the evidence disappears with them. How can I help? Kellerman hesitated. Honestly, Chief, the safest thing you can do right now is nothing. Let this stay in the hands of people whose job is investigation, not marksmanship. Megan's jaw tightened. With respect, ma'am, doing nothing was never really something I was good at. Kellerman almost smiled, though the expression didn't quite reach her eyes. No, I don't imagine it was. Over the following week, Megan found herself watching Bell from a careful distance whenever their paths happened to cross around the base, in the mess hall, in the hallway outside logistics, at the gym, in the early mornings when most operators were still asleep. He looked on the surface like any other career non-commissioned officer, unremarkable, professionally competent, the kind of man nobody would ever suspect of anything darker than being slightly too fond of his morning coffee. Megan understood exactly the point. She mentioned this to Coleman one evening, the two of them sitting outside the barracks under a sky thick with more stars than either of them ever saw back home. You're not supposed to be involved in this, Coleman said, not for the first time. I know. You keep saying that like it changes anything about the fact that you keep bringing it up. Megan managed a small, tired smile. I can't stop thinking about it, Ray. Every time I see him in the mess hall laughing with people who have no idea, I think about Rayos getting shot at from 6 directions because that man decided a payout was worth more than our lives. You don't know that for certain yet. I know the timeline. I know the money. I know what walking into that compound felt like, knowing later that someone here might have handed Volkov the blueprint for exactly how to kill us. Coleman was quiet for a long moment, staring up at the stars. You want my honest opinion? Always. I think you need to let Kellerman do her job the same way people needed to let you do yours on that ridge. You didn't want command second-guessing every calculation you made with that rifle. Give her the same respect. Megan absorbed that, the fairness of it landing somewhere uncomfortable in her chest. That's a low blow, Ray. Maybe. Doesn't make it wrong. 3 weeks passed with no visible movement, no arrests, no confrontations, just the slow, invisible grinding of an investigation happening entirely behind closed doors that Megan wasn't cleared to enter. She threw herself back into training, into range work, into the disciplined rhythm of a job that had always made sense to her precisely because it demanded total focus and left no room for the kind of uncertainty currently gnawing at the edges of her patience. Then on a gray morning that felt unremarkable in every way until it wasn't, Kellerman found her in the equipment bay, her expression tight, urgent. Chief, walk with me. Megan followed her outside, away from anyone who might overhear. What happened? Bell requested emergency leave this morning. Said his mother had a medical emergency back in the States. We checked. There's no medical emergency. His mother's been dead for 6 years. Megan's pulse spiked. He's running. We think so. Which means either he suspects we're onto him, or he was always planning an exit once this payment cycle finished, and the timing just happens to be unfortunate for us. Where's he now? Base Transportation Office. He's requesting priority flight authorization to Ramstein, and from there, presumably somewhere we won't be able to touch him. You're going to stop him. Kellerman's expression darkened. That's the problem. Legally right now, all we have is circumstantial financial evidence. We don't have enough to detain him. If we move too fast without solid grounds, the competent lawyer tears the whole case apart before it ever reaches a courtroom, and he walks free with immunity from ever being tried again for the same evidence. So what happens if he gets on that plane? Then he disappears into a network that's very good at making people disappear, and we lose him, and everything he could tell us about who else might be compromised on this base disappears right along with him. Megan felt something harden inside her, the same cold clarity that had settled over her on that ridge weeks earlier. Then we need something more than circumstantial evidence. Fast. Chief, I already told you. I know what you told me, Megan said, but you also told me the safest thing I could do was nothing, and I think we're well past safest right now. Kellerman studied her for a long, tense moment, clearly weighing regulation against urgency. What are you thinking? I'm thinking Bell doesn't know I overheard anything. As far as he's concerned, I'm just the sniper who took the shot on Volkov and got reprimanded for it. There's no reason for him to be cautious around me. You want to approach him directly. I want to give him a reason to think his exit isn't as clean as he believes it is. People who think they've been caught make mistakes. They talk. They panic. They reach out to people they shouldn't reach out to, trying to figure out how much trouble they're actually in. Kellerman hesitated, clearly torn between protocol and the ticking clock of a flight departure that was, according to her watch, less than 2 hours away. This isn't sanctioned, Chief. If this goes wrong, I can't protect you from the consequences. I'm aware, ma'am. And if he's dangerous, if he realizes what you're doing, he's a logistics coordinator, ma'am, not exactly the kind of man I'm worried about in a physical confrontation. Kellerman exhaled hard, glancing at her watch again. You have 90 minutes before that flight boards. I'll have a team monitoring from a discreet distance, but Megan, listen to me. The second this becomes anything other than a conversation, you disengage. Do you understand me? Understood. Megan found Bell exactly where Kellerman said he'd be seated, in the transportation office's small waiting area, a single duffel bag beside his feet, his knee bouncing with a nervous energy that hadn't been visible in any of Megan's previous distant observations of him. She sat down 2 seats away, close enough to speak, casual enough not to raise alarm. Master Sergeant Bell, she said, didn't expect to see you here. Heading somewhere? Bell glanced over, and for just a fraction of a second, something flickered across his face before settling into a practiced professional smile. Chief Carter, family emergency, unfortunately. My mother. I'm sorry to hear that, Megan said, keeping her voice light, sympathetic. That's rough, especially with everything going on around here lately. What do you mean? Just the investigation, Megan said, watching him carefully as she spoke. Command's been pretty quiet about the details, but word travels. Something about a security review into how Volkov's compound ended up so well prepared for an operation almost nobody outside this base should have known about. Bell's knee stopped bouncing. I hadn't heard anything about that, he said, his voice carefully controlled, though Megan noted the slight change in his breathing. Really, I figured logistics would have heard something given how much of the planning software runs through your department. I coordinate transport and supply schedules, Chief. I don't have visibility into assault planning specifics. Huh, Megan said, feigning mild confusion. That's strange. I thought the operational planning platform ran through a shared logistics interface. Guess I misunderstood how that works. Bell's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. You'd have to ask someone in IT about the technical architecture. Not really my area. Sure, Megan said easily. Probably nothing anyway. Command's investigating a dozen possible angles from what I hear. Some kind of financial trail, apparently. Probably points toward a contractor or someone off base. Makes more sense than someone actually stationed here. Bell reached for his duffel bag, gripping the strap slightly tighter than the moment required. When's my flight boarding again? I should check in. You seem a little tense, Sergeant, Megan said quietly, no longer bothering with the pretense of idle conversation. Family emergencies do that, I guess. Bell's eyes met hers, and for one long suspended moment, something passed between them, an understanding neither of them said aloud, but both of them recognized completely. I should get to my gate, Bell said, standing abruptly. Of course, Megan said, standing as well, watching him closely. Take care of yourself out there, Sergeant. He didn't respond. He simply walked away faster than the moment strictly required, glancing back once toward Megan before disappearing through the security checkpoint. Megan pulled out her phone and dialed Kellerman immediately. He's spooked, she said the moment the call connected. Badly. I mentioned the investigation and the financial trail. Nothing specific, nothing he could trace back to actual evidence. But he knows something's coming for him now. He's moving toward his gate. Copy that, Kellerman said, her voice suddenly urgent. Stand by. Megan waited, tension coiling tighter in her chest with every passing second, watching the departure board flicker with gate assignments and boarding times that meant nothing to her beyond the fact that somewhere behind that checkpoint, a man who might have gotten her entire team killed was one boarding call away from vanishing completely. Her phone buzzed 20 minutes later. Chief, this is Kellerman. We picked up an outgoing call from Bell's cell phone the moment he cleared the checkpoint. Encrypted, but the metadata shows it connected briefly to a number we've been tracking as part of Volkov's remaining network. He called them. He called them panicking, presumably trying to figure out how much danger he's in and whether they can help him disappear faster than we can catch him. That call is enough combined with the financial trail to secure an emergency detainment order. Security is moving to intercept him at the gate right now. Megan closed her eyes briefly, relief and tension tangled together in a way that felt almost dizzying. Copy that. Chief Kellerman added, her voice softer now, almost reluctant. That conversation you just had with him, that wasn't authorized, and I need you to understand it could have gone very differently if he'd reacted with anything other than panic. I understand, ma'am. But it worked, and I think given everything we're going to have a very similar conversation to the one Command already had with you a few weeks ago. Megan managed a tired, humorless laugh. Reprimand and commendation in the same folder. Something like that, Kellerman said. Seems to be a pattern with you, Chief. Security detained Bell at the departure gate less than 10 minutes later, and what followed over the subsequent days unfolded with the slow, methodical inevitability of an investigation finally given enough evidence to move forward without hesitation. Confronted with the intercepted call, the financial records, and the growing weight of evidence against him, Bell's composure cracked within the first hour of formal questioning. He hadn't been a true believer in anything. It turned out not ideologically aligned with Volkov's operation, not motivated by any cause beyond simple desperation. Gambling debts accumulated over years had left him vulnerable to exactly the kind of approach that predatory networks like Volkov's specialized in identifying a man with access, a man with financial pressure, a man who told himself each time he handed over another piece of operational information that this would be the last time that this payment would finally clear the debt that never seemed to actually shrink. It hadn't started with the mission to rescue Whitmore. That had simply been the most consequential piece of information he had ever sold, the culmination of 8 months of smaller compromises that had slowly, quietly eroded the security of an entire base without anyone noticing until 3 defensive rings and 60 armed men had been waiting in ambush for a team that believed until the very last second that they held the element of surprise. Hayes called Megan into his office a week later, the same office where her review had first been discussed, though the atmosphere this time felt entirely different. Chief Carter, he said, gesturing for her to sit, I wanted you to hear this directly from me before it becomes official record. Yes, sir. Bell has confessed fully, financial motive, sustained contact with Volkov's network over 8 months, direct responsibility for compromising the operational details of your mission. He's cooperating now, providing information about the broader network, which may help us dismantle more of what Volkov built before he died. Megan absorbed this slowly. So it wasn't personal. It wasn't about hating this country or believing in what Volkov stood for. No, Hayes said. It rarely is in cases like this. It's almost always something smaller and sadder than people expect. Debt, fear, a series of small compromises that felt survivable in the moment until they weren't anymore. That almost makes it worse, Megan said quietly. I know, Hayes agreed. It's easier to hate an enemy who believes in something monstrous than a man who simply made a series of increasingly desperate choices until he found himself capable of getting an entire team killed. They sat in silence for a moment, the weight of everything that had happened over the past several weeks settling into the room between them. I also want to formally acknowledge, Hayes continued, that your unauthorized intervention today directly led to Bell's detainment before he could disappear entirely. Kellerman has already submitted a report detailing your involvement. Megan's stomach tightened slightly. Sir, I understand if that requires another review. Hayes studied her for a long moment, something almost amused flickering behind his tired eyes. Chief Carter, I've spent 30 years believing that discipline and instinct exist in tension with each other, that good soldiers follow orders and exceptional soldiers occasionally know when not to. I still believe that's true mostly. But I'm starting to think you might be teaching this entire base something I never expected to learn this late in my career. What's that, sir? That sometimes the person willing to step outside the boundaries isn't reckless. Sometimes they're just paying closer attention than everyone else, and they're willing to accept the consequences of acting on what they see even when nobody else is ready to act yet. Megan felt something loosen slightly in her chest, a tension she hadn't fully realized she was still carrying since the moment she'd first pulled that trigger weeks earlier. Does that mean no second review, sir? Hayes allowed himself something close to a genuine smile. It means I'm recommending a commendation, Chief. No reprimand this time. You gave Kellerman's team the exact leverage they needed at exactly the moment they needed it, and you did it with restraint, with judgment, and without a single shot fired. That's not the same situation as the Ridge. That's something else entirely, and I think it deserves to be recognized as its own kind of courage. Megan sat with that for a hiding moment, feeling something settle inside him that felt for the first time in weeks almost like peace. News of Bell's arrest and the broader dismantling of Volkov's remaining network spread slowly through the base over the following weeks, filtered through official channels that carefully avoided naming Megan's specific role in how it had unfolded. She preferred it that way, she realized. She'd never wanted her name attached to headlines, never wanted the specific mechanics of what she'd done broadcast to people who hadn't earned the context to understand it properly. Coleman found her one evening on the range running drills long after most operators had already called it a day, the sun sinking low behind the distant mountains that reminded her every single time she looked at them of a ridge 2.5 kilometers from a courtyard she would never fully stop thinking about. "You're going to wear out that rifle before you wear out yourself," Coleman said, settling onto the bench beside her equipment. "Just staying sharp, Ray. You've stayed sharp enough for one lifetime, Megan. Maybe even two." She lowered her rifle, glancing at him. "You heard about Bell, Tim. Everyone's heard about Bell. Not everyone knows you're the reason he's sitting in a holding cell right now, instead of halfway across the world with the new identity." "I had help," Megan said. "Kellerman did the real work. I just had a conversation." "You had a conversation that spooked a traitor into making a call that got him caught. That's not nothing, Megan." She was quiet for a moment, staring out toward the mountains, toward a version of herself that had existed weeks earlier, lying prone on cold rock, carrying a decision that had felt at the time like it might define the rest of her career either way it went. "You ever think about how close all of this came to going completely differently?" she asked. "If I'd hesitated one more second, if the wind had shifted wrong, if Bell had made that call an hour earlier and disappeared before anyone noticed." "I think about it constantly," Coleman admitted. "I think that's what makes what you did matter so much. Because it wasn't inevitable. It wasn't guaranteed. You made a series of impossible calls one after another, and every single one of them could have gone the other way. That's not exactly comforting, Ray." "It's not supposed to be comforting," Coleman said. "It's supposed to be true. Comfort is easy. Truth is a lot harder to sit with, but it's usually worth more in the end." Megan managed a small smile, the tension in her shoulders finally beginning to loosen after weeks that had felt like they'd never stopped demanding something more from her. Months later, on a quiet afternoon that felt almost unremarkable compared to everything that had come before it, Megan found herself standing in front of a small gathering in a base auditorium, an audience of maybe 40 people, mostly senior officers, a handful of operators from her unit. Riquez near the front, Delgado beside him, his shoulder fully healed now, Ortiz grinning like he'd been waiting his whole career for a moment exactly like this one. Hayes stood at a podium reading from a prepared statement that formally acknowledged Megan's actions during the Whitmore rescue operation, actions that had in the months since contributed directly to the dismantling of one of the more dangerous private military networks operating in the region, along with the exposure of an internal security breach that could have compromised far more than a single mission. "Chief Petty Officer Megan Carter," Hayes read his voice carrying clearly through the room, "has demonstrated exceptional skill, discipline, and moral clarity under circumstances that exceeded every reasonable expectation this military places on its operators. In recognition of these actions and in acknowledgement of the complicated, layered nature of true courage, this command formally commends her service." There was no medal ceremony with cameras, no press release, no headline anywhere that would ever carry her name attached to what had actually happened on that mountain. That wasn't how her world worked, and honestly, Megan had never wanted it any other way. The recognition that mattered to her wasn't happening in front of cameras. It was happening in this room among people who actually understood what those weeks had cost her, who understood the weight of standing on a ridge with a decision that could have destroyed her career or worse, and choosing to make it anyway, because a man's life had been worth more to her than the safety of her own record. Afterward, in the quiet that followed the small ceremony, Reyes approached her, extending his hand. "Congratulations, Chief," he said. "Thank you, sir." "I mean it, Carter. What you did out there and everything that came after it, that's not something most people are built for. Most people freeze at the first hard decision. You made about 6 of them in a row, each one harder than the last, and you never once looked away from any of it." Megan considered that for a moment. "I think I just kept doing the only thing I knew how to do, sir. One decision at a time. I never had some grand plan. I just refused to let the next impossible moment convince me to stop paying attention. Reyes smiled, something warm and genuine crossing his usually guarded expression. Maybe that's the whole secret. Maybe heroism isn't some singular dramatic moment. Maybe it's just refusing to stop paying attention over and over until the crisis finally ends. Later that evening, Megan walked alone toward the edge of the base, toward a quiet spot where the mountains were visible in the distance, painted gold and orange by a sunset that felt for the first time in a long while entirely peaceful. She thought about Whitmore home now, with his family teaching his daughter to ride a bicycle in a driveway 8,000 miles away from a courtyard he'd nearly died in. She thought about Delgado's healed shoulder, about Ortiz's easy grin, about Reyes carrying the weight of command with a little more humility than he had before. She thought about Bell sitting in a cell somewhere wrestling with choices that had cost him everything in exchange for debts that would never have been worth it, not even before any of this had started. And she thought about herself standing here now, no longer the person who'd walked into that briefing room months earlier, half expecting to be tested and dismissed by people who couldn't quite decide if she belonged among them. She belonged. She'd always belonged. It had simply taken an impossible morning and a freezing ridge, a shot that shouldn't have been possible, and every difficult, uncertain decision that followed it to make everyone else finally see what she'd known about herself the entire time. Coleman found her there, as he so often seemed to settling quietly beside her without needing an invitation. "Beautiful evening," he said. "Yeah," Megan agreed. "It really is." "You did good, Megan. Not just on that ridge, all of it, every hard choice that came after." Megan was quiet for the long moment, watching the last light fade behind the distant peaks. "I used to think being good at this job meant never hesitating," she finally said. "Never doubting, just pure discipline and precision, nothing else allowed in. But I don't think that's true anymore. I think being good at this means doubting constantly and choosing to act anyway because waiting for certainty that never comes isn't caution. It's just another way of failing the people who need you." Coleman nodded slowly, understanding, settling into the quiet space between them. "That's a hard thing to carry, though. Doubt and action both at once." "It is," Megan agreed, "but I think that's the only kind of courage that actually means anything. The kind that admits it's scared, admits it might be wrong, and steps forward regardless because someone else's life is worth more than the comfort of staying still." There would be other missions after this one, other ridges, other impossible distances, measured in wind and elevation, and the steady, disciplined rhythm of a heartbeat, trained to slow down exactly when everything else in the world seemed to be speeding up. Megan Carter would never become a household name, never see her story told on the evening news, never receive the kind of public recognition that turns a person into a symbol rather than allowing them to simply remain human. But somewhere in classified records, buried beneath layers of protocol and procedure that most people would never be cleared to read, there would always exist an account of one impossible morning when an entire rescue mission collapsed in flames and gunfire, when command gave an order that any reasonable person would have followed without question, and when one woman alone on a mountain with a rifle and a decision nobody else could make for her chose instead to trust everything she had ever trained herself to become. She hadn't done it to prove anyone wrong. She hadn't done it for glory or headlines or vindication against every doubt she'd carried through years of being underestimated in rooms full of people who should have known better. She had done it because a man was kneeling in the dirt, and the only thing standing between him and death was her willingness to trust her own hands when everyone else told her to wait. That was the truth the record would never fully capture. The truth that lived instead in the quiet respect of the people who had actually been there, who had heard that impossible shot break across 2.5 kilometers of open air, and who understood in a way no ceremony could ever properly honor exactly what it had cost her to take it. Sometimes courage isn't loud. Sometimes it doesn't come wrapped in medals or headlines, or grand cinematic music swelling behind a triumphant final scene. Sometimes it looks exactly like a woman on a cold mountain ridge, hands steady despite everything screaming inside her, to hesitate choosing in one single irreversible heartbeat to become the difference between a tragedy and a rescue. And in the end, that was the only truth that ever really mattered. Not the reprimand, not the commendation, not the danger or the doubt or the impossible distance between a rifle and a target that should have been beyond anyone's reach. Just one person refusing to look away when everyone else had already decided to give up hope.